Welcome back to the workbench. We left off working on her hair, and that's exactly where we will start today. If you remember the clay we mixed yesterday, you might notice that today it feels a little dry. This is incredibly common, especially when working with clay that has been exposed to the air or previously handled. But there is a very simple, accessible trick to revive it: hand cream or skincare glycerin rear. You don't need expensive specialized softeners. A tiny drop of everyday hand cream kneaded thoroughly into the clay works wonders. You must knead it deeply and continuously. If you skip this step or rush it, the clay will retain dry, lumpy spots. When you attempt to pull delicate strands for the hair, those lumps will catch, and your strands will break or look uneven. Once the clay is restored to a smooth, elastic consistency, we can begin laying down the hair. For this specific doll, the hair design is very straight, smooth, and intentional. There are no wild, stray hairs flying in opposite directions. We pull each fine strand and lay it down meticulously, starting from the crown and working our way down. We push the tips inward slightly to create a soft curve. This specific technique gives the doll an incredibly gentle, quiet, and well-behaved demeanor. It takes patience, one strand at a time, ensuring they overlap naturally without adding too much bulk to the sides of the head. We secure the top firmly with a tool, pressing it down so the hair stays perfectly in place. With the hair complete, it's time to become fashion designers. Yesterday we made a pink outfit for a different doll, but today I want to go in a different direction. Green doesn't feel quite right, and I've done a lot of blue and white recently. So, let's create a beautiful misty tarot purple. To achieve this specific hue, I don't just use purple clay out of the package. I take a large base of white clay. Always start with more white than you think you need and begin incorporating leftover scraps from my workbench. A little bit of deep blue, a tiny touch of black, some red, and a bit of purple. You knead, pull, and stretch the clay repeatedly. At first it looks messy, but as the pigments blend into the white, the saturation softens. What emerges is a gorgeously muted, slightly gray-toned, misty tarot purple. For the top layer of her dress, we are switching from ultralight clay to resin clay. Resin clay is slightly more difficult to manipulate, but it yields a spectacular, realistic drape that you just can't get with ultralight clay. I roll out a small piece of our new tarot purple resin clay. Using a blade, I trim the top, bottom, and both sides, removing the excess to create a neat trapezoid shape. To give this bodice a touch of elegance reminiscent of a formal evening gown, I use a small tool to press and fold the center of the trapezoid, creating a beautiful pleated, sweetheart neckline effect. I wrap this carefully around the doll's upper body. We don't need a lot of length here. I snip the excess off the back at an upward angle, using a knife-shaped tool to tuck the edges neatly behind her, pushing the clay securely onto her body. Now for the skirt. We want this skirt to have volume and a beautiful, heavy drape. I take another piece of the tarot purple clay. A common mistake here is grabbing too much clay, which results in a thick, clunky skirt. Take a modest amount and roll it out with a rolling pin. Because we have to roll it in sections, it's entirely normal for the thickness to be uneven. You can physically see and feel that the middle might be thin while the edges remain thick. I go back over those thicker sections, applying even pressure to push the clay out further. Here is a vital workbench secret: before we do any folding, we must use baby powder. If the clay is too moist, it will stick to itself, and you won't be able to separate the pleats. I generously pat baby powder onto the surface of the clay, flip it over, and pat the back as well. Next, I trim the uneven edges with a blade to create a clean rectangle. Now we fold. It's exactly like folding a paper fan back in school. Fold, press flat. Fold, press flat. Because we applied the baby powder, the pleats stay distinct. Once folded, I gently pull at the bottom to ensure the length is even, and I pinch the top waistline inward. We don't want to add bulk to our waist, so pinching the top tightly creates a denser, more realistic gathering of fabric at the waistline. I trim the top edge to fit her torso perfectly and set it aside. For the very top layer of the skirt, I want a translucent deep blue. I take a piece of resin clay. When you first take resin clay out, it feels quite stiff. You must rely on the warmth of your hands. Keep pulling and kneading until the heat softens it into a pliable texture. I lightly brush a very small amount of dark blue and light blue pastel powder onto the clay and knead it in. It might look too light right now, but resin clay darkens significantly as it dries. Resin clay is wonderful because it is slightly translucent. As I roll it out on a smooth plastic folder, I can hold it up to the light. The areas that let more light through are thinner, the darker areas are thicker. This helps me roll it out as evenly as possible. I apply baby powder again, trim it, and fold it just like the first layer. To attach this resin clay skirt to the ultralight clay body, we don't use glue, we use water. Resin clay will not stick if it's dry. I use a water brush to lightly dampen the waistline of the skirt. The water acts as a powerful binder, melting the clay just enough so that it bonds seamlessly and permanently to the body. I wrap the skirt around her, pressing the pleats gently to maintain their shape while securing the waist. A doll's expressiveness relies heavily on her hands. I take a small piece of skin tone declay. I'm using a professional modeling clay that is firm at first but softens beautifully with kneading. I roll out a long, thin cylinder for the arms, ensuring the thickness is consistent. I fold it to check the length, making sure both arms are identical. To form the hand, I press one end flat. If you look at it from the side, the wrist area remains thick, while the clay tapers off to be much thinner at the fingertips. Using a pair of fine scissors, I make the first cut, a diagonal snip downward to separate the thumb. For the rest of the fingers, I make a horizontal score mark exactly halfway between the wrist and the tip. This separates the palm from the fingers. Then I cut tiny, inverted triangles out of the top half to form the remaining 4 fingers. Proportion is critical here. This is a stylized, cute character, so the fingers cannot be too long. The index finger must not be longer than the middle finger. I carefully trim the sharp tips off the fingers and adjust their lengths. Once the shape is right, I use a needle tool to press gently into the webbing between each finger to define them. I smooth out the back of the hand and press into the palm, pushing the clay slightly upward to thin out the webbing of the thumb. Before attaching the arms, I measure them against the body. The total arm length from shoulder to waist should be divided so that the upper arm is slightly shorter than the forearm. I cut the arms to the correct length, ensuring a flat, clean cut at the shoulder. Using a tiny dab of white latex glue, I secure the arms to the sides of the torso, making sure the limbs hang straight and natural. To bring warmth and life to the doll, we apply pastels. Using a soft brush, I pick up a sequence of colors: light pink, then deep pink, then light pink again. I dust this color gently onto the tips of her fingers, her wrists, the inner bends of her elbows, and the shadows where her skin meets her clothing. I also carefully apply a blush to her cheeks and brush a little pink along her hairline and the hair framing her face. Now, let's give her something to interact with. I have a tiny, pre-made ice cream cup dessert. I want to place it slightly to the left so it doesn't obscure her face. I apply a dot of 401 instant glue to the front of her dress and press the cup into place. Next, we pose her hands. I carefully bend her left arm up so her hand hooks naturally around the handle of the cup. For her right hand, I bend it to rest gently on the top rim of the dessert. I apply a tiny amount of glue to the rim of the cup and press her fingertips down, creating a dynamic, engaging pose. To finish her look, I add a pre-made floral accessory to her hair. I choose a small purple flower that complements her tarot dress and attach it to the right side of her head with a dab of cream glue. The right side feels a bit more understated and elegant than placing it dead center. I also attach a tiny, sparkling blue star earring to the side of her face. It looks just like a piece of sugar. The scene feels like it needs a little more magic, so we are going to create a companion for her, a little flying elf. I take a larger piece of skin-tone clay. I want this elf to be a bit chubby to fit the cute aesthetic and roll it into a round face. I pinch the bottom of the face slightly to give it some shape. For the body, I use more of the tarot purple clay, rolling it into a cone. I pinch and flare the bottom edge outward so it looks like a little flowing robe. I attach the head to the body, but I twist it slightly to the side. This simple tilt instantly gives the elf a whimsical, inquisitive personality, almost like a traditional weather doll. For the elf's legs, I roll 2 small cylinders, pinch the ends to form tiny feet, and press them together with a slight curve to create a kudo-shaped leg stance. I attach these under the skirt. The arms are rolled even thinner and shorter than the legs, attached to the sides and trimmed to fit. For the elf's hair, we need a contrasting pop of color. I take a vibrant watermelon red mixed from red and white clay. After kneading it until it's perfectly smooth, I use scissors to snip a large, flat piece of the red clay. I drape this directly over the elf's head, smoothing it down. To create volume, I roll thin strips of red clay, pinch them flat, and curl the ends inward. I layer these curled pieces onto the top and sides of the head. I call this the popcorn or wool roll hairstyle. It gives the character a wonderfully mischievous and energetic vibe. An elf isn't an elf without wings. To make them, I use a metal circle cutter. But here is a great tool modification trick using a pair of pliers. I pinch the sides of the circular cutter to create an elongated teardrop or petal shape, one end wide, the other end pinched narrow. I roll out a piece of yellow resin clay, keeping it slightly thicker this time. Using my modified cutter, I stamp out 2 large teardrops for the top wings and 2 smaller ones for the bottom wings. I pinch the tips to make them slightly sharper and press a large and small wing together. I repeat this for the other side. Resin clay attaches perfectly with water, so I dab a tiny bit of moisture onto the back of the elf and press the wings firmly into place. I check the alignment from the front, side, and back to ensure they sit evenly. Finally, it's time to bring the whole scene together on the display base. I use 401 glue to secure the elf hovering just to the side of our main doll. To tie the composition together, I use some pre-made blue and purple clay hydrangeas, gluing them around the base of the dolls. As a final artistic touch, I take my pastel brush and sweep a blend of green and dark blue pastels directly onto the floor of the base around the flowers. This subtle shading creates an illusion of depth, making it look as though there is a dense, leafy background just out of sight. And there we have a beautifully detailed, elegant doll in a pleated skirt, accompanied by her own tiny, magical flying elf.